Well, we are here with Dr. Liz Nesbit from the Burke Museum. And Liz, you should just go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everybody. This is really wonderful, and I'm so sorry I can't see you. So as Kathryn said, we just moved into this new building. We moved October. We opened in October. We started moving a year before that. At the back corner there is the old building that was pulled down eventually. And this is now a new parking lot. So it wasn't very far to take our materials, but we have 16 million specimens. So one way or other, it was kind of a long haul. Here is the entrance. I'm just going to go back. That is this entrance we're talking about. The main entrance where the On the Res Cafe is on this side. But we're going to go in this entrance now. And this is a right whale, a modern whale that died off our coast. And the biologist buried it in sand for 3 years and then took it up and we mounted it and it's hanging up there. It's absolutely spectacular. And this is our mastodon. The mastodon was on display first. You go up the stairs and the main entrance is up here. I wanted to add that the Burke Museum is on the University of Washington campus. It is a research museum. All of us curators have research positions in departments on campus. And we have a bunch of different things that happen in the museum. We have ethnology, archaeology, biology, and paleontology. Some of biology is elsewhere. The herbarium, which is plants, and the fish collection are in other buildings. And I just put this picture in to show you that we have loads of students working here. And it's just the most exciting place to work. The building is very tall and very open. It's an atrium that goes all the way up to the 3rd floor. We're on the 3rd floor here, which is paleontology. But each of the floors are like 2 floors deep. So it's a very big, wide, open building. It's really beautiful. Paleontology is at the end of the stairs there, and I'm going to zoom in on that. And that is our marine reptile, an elasmosaur that was found on Vancouver Island, and he's hanging at the top of the stairs. So when you walk in the building, you can look up the stairs and see him. He has better lighting now, so you can actually see what he looks like. There he is. Each of the collection spaces has windows, and you can look in, and we've put our collections out so that the visitors to the museum can look in the windows and see what's there. So this is biology. You can see some buffalo horns here. And here's biology again. This is paleontology. So this side is our research space. The other side is the exhibits. I'm going to talk about the exhibits. But every weekend we open these doors. There's a door that's open there. And people can walk in. We have stations there and you can talk to paleontologists. So every weekend for about 3 or 4 hours, every single division is open and you can walk in and chat to people. Okay, so we have the collection space and the exhibits, and I'll come back to the exhibits. There are currently 3 paleontology curators, Greg Wilson, Caroline Stromberg, and Chris Seedor. I am emeritus curator. There is no other invertebrate curator, and they're not likely to fill the position for a few years. We have a couple of collections managers. Ron Ing is one of them. We have another preparator. Kelsey is our new preparator, and Ruth Martin, who also teaches at Green River, does microfossils, and so she's there in the microfossil lab. And then we have lots of students working with us. And here they're working on, Kelsey's working on the mammoth. Some of you might have known about a mammoth tusk found downtown, and she's working on that mammoth tusk. Here is the inside of the collections room with a giant bird. That's a cast. It's a cast of a real bird, but it's not the real bones, and that comes from Brazil. It was a gift, interesting gifts that people give us. And these white cabinets are where the collections are. We have many of them strung right across a very big room. Behind the cabinets are what we call oversize. It's material that doesn't fit into the cabinets because it's too big. And then we have boxes and boxes and boxes of more material. We have so much material. And there I am standing by one of my cabinets, and all the fossils are in the drawers. We have about, I think we counted like 4.5 million different specimens in paleontology alone. But remember, some of them are tiny, some of them are microscopic, some of them are up as big as the bird. We also have, as you can see in the front here, some minerals. So here's pictures of how the fossils are stored. We store them in separate little boxes. The bottom picture are whales, little fossil dolphins, in fact, from Washington State. And the top picture, you can see how each of the specimens is in a little box that has a label. The label is attached. The information from the label is in our database, and we print the labels out of our database. Every specimen gets 2 numbers. One is an individual one for that specimen, and the other one is the locality from where it comes. So we have a very good data collection system. And there's my inverts, there's the shells. So this is a collection that had not, at the time that photo was taken, had not been put into the database. The labels, this is just when we were moving, and the labels are handwritten and some of them are upside down, and we had to sort out all that mess. And there's Ruth with her microscopic stuff. It's one of the research projects I work on, is using these marine microscopic organisms to give the time, the ages of the beds, because I know as you're doing dinosaurs, you know more or less when each dinosaur lived. You know about the Jurassic, the early and the late Jurassic. We use these to get an actual age on the rocks. Okay, so let's go back to the exhibit and how we did it. As I said, it was planning for the new building was 10 years in the making. We had to decide what we wanted to do and how we were going to do it. We came to this conclusion that what we really wanted to do was turn the museum inside out, so that all the visitors could come, not only see the galleries with exhibits, but also look into what we do. I don't think people really realized we did so much research. So now you can look through the windows and see what research people are doing. And all the collections have windows that you can look in. And then we had to decide on what was going to go on exhibit. And so that was a much smaller group of people. It was essentially the curators decided that. And there were 2 really important pieces that we wanted to do. The first one, we wanted to highlight Washington State. We are the Washington State Natural History Museum. And the second one, we wanted to highlight our research. So paleontologists had a real problem with the first one. We don't have a lot of fossils from Washington State. We don't have any dinosaurs from Washington State. And if you don't put dinosaurs on exhibit in the Natural History Museum, nobody's going to come. And we didn't want that. So we moved our dinosaurs that we had, and Kathryn will talk about that later. And we talked about each person's research and how we did our research. And so I'll go through that. Once you've decided that, then we had to decide what we wanted to go on exhibit and what stories to be told. Luckily, we had people, we had professionals help us all the way. We hired a design team. We hired a label writing team. We hired some people to help us think straight. We also hired somebody to try and translate our scientificese into readable English so that you wouldn't have to listen to our long words. And sometimes it was stressful. Sometimes none of us agreed on anything. And sometimes we would sail away. I think paleontology had the easiest time because we've done so many exhibits already. And so let me see, I think we do have, I think Kathryn, you gave me some other slides.
Yeah.
So it was 3 years. So it took us 3 years to design the exhibits, to decide what specimens to put in, to decide what labels to go in, and to decide the storylines. And the storyline is essentially in the middle is the Mesozoic. The middle, this section here, starts in the Jurassic. This is an old slide, and there's more material in the front there where my cursor is. We
Actually,
have
if you advance the slides, you should be able to get a close-up of that exhibit.
Yeah, there's a later slide, you're right.
Okay.
So that starts from the Triassic, goes through to the Jurassic and into the Cretaceous. And then at the very back, we'll come around to it, at the very back corner there, there's the Ice Ages. On this side, where the person is leaning over, we have the Washington Pacific Northwest fossils. And we're really talking about climate change there. So that's where the fossil whales are, and we'll see pictures of that. And this side, I think, is my favorite. It is a wall of ammonites. It is part of the Mesozoic exhibit, and it's just a wall of ammonites and a discussion about different ammonites. I had been talking for, easily 15 years about doing an ammonite exhibit. And we have a donor who has an incredible collection of ammonites. And he kept saying to me, if you do the exhibit, I will donate. And so I finally went to him and said, we're doing the exhibit, I need you to donate. And I would say half the specimens on that wall come from him. So that was very exciting. Okay, so here is the exhibit before it was finished also. We're getting there, we're getting a few more bits and pieces here, but there's a lot missing here. The next thing that happened is they found a T-Rex in Montana. We were not planning for a T-Rex. There was no room for a T-Rex. But if you have a T-Rex, and ours is apparently one of the best in the world, you have to put him on display. So we had to move everything and juggle everything and make space to put the T-Rex skull. And so he is on display, and I know you're going to talk about that later. On the back corner here, we have two little exhibits on what is paleontology, what has plate tectonics and geological time got to do with paleontology. So it's essentially, how do we know what we know? And that was really fun to do. And here's the one you're talking about. So we started off with the Triassic with these tiny little pre-dinosaur bipedal reptiles and some lovely fossil wood from Petrified National Park and some explanations of them. And you can see the big dinosaurs behind there. So this is what we want. We want little boys to come and see our exhibits. And there is the Stegosaur and the Allosaurus and the Tyrannosaurus. And I know we're going to come back to that, but I just want to move. Kathryn, really have to come back to this one. There's the T-Rex. I want to, she's going to, there. Show, no.
Which one are you looking for, Liz?
The whales.
Yeah, keep going. And we're going to skip through a few things that I'll come back to. But, and actually, back up just a sec, Liz. You had your ammonite wall there.
No, but I can't see him. It doesn't want to go there.
Okay, we'll just keep.
There we go. So there's my ammonite wall. It talks about what ammonites do and how they do it with a beautiful mural. And it's really lovely. I do hope you guys will come and see it. And then I want to go to the Cenozoic wall. Do you know where that is?
It's towards the end. You might want to.
Oh, there's the Ice Age one that she's going to talk about. Here we go.
There you go.
And then on the other side, when you come around, the other side of the Mesozoic is this bit about Washington and the Washington whales. And so these whales are about 30 to 35 million years old. They're some of the oldest baleen whales in the world. Washington has one of the best collections of fossil whales and fossil seabirds in the world. We're just very lucky to have that. And this is displayed with a bunch of the clams and snails that were associated with this whale. Opposite that, on the other wall, we're talking about global temperatures. The white line is a global temperature from very high, about 50 million years ago, going down, 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 all the way down until we get a little blip there and all the way to the ice ages. So we went from very warm to very cold, and that is depicted in the plants, in the fossil plants, and in the vertebrates. There's a crocodile, a turtle, there's a bird, there's a saber-toothed cat, a little tiny saber-toothed cat, and lots of different things that you can see there. There's tons. We tried hard not to fill the spaces, but we ended up filling a lot of the spaces. There it is again, a much more complete one. And it tells you how we know about climates. How do we know about ancient climates? How do we know about climate change? It's all based on the fossils. Okay, so Kathryn, do you want to go all the way back now? Or shall I answer some questions?
Actually, we have a bunch of questions.
Okay, there's the fossil, there's the modern whale again.
And one of them is it possible to find shark teeth in Washington?
You know, I've hardly ever found shark's teeth. And so I have worked, so just so you know why I'm retired, I finished my PhD in 1982. In 1979 and 1980, my field area, although I was at the University of California at Berkeley, my field area was under where Mount St. Helens erupted. And I was working with marine stuff there, and I did find a couple of shark's teeth. When Mount St. Helens erupted, it completely covered my entire field area. And so looking at the anniversary 40 years ago, I was sitting down there crying because I couldn't find any fossils. But that's about the only place, and yeah, it's very hard to find. I mean, like in my career of working here, I probably found about 6 or 7. That's all.
Yeah, I always have to say, I found one shark's tooth when I was a student. It was a very tiny shark's tooth. It was in Tukwila. I thought, well, this is great. And then I never found another one again.
That's the other place where you can, and that's also covered up now.
Yeah. It was across from the police firing range at the time.
Right.
And so every now and then you'd hear this big, they exploded a car when we were, for test purposes, when we were out there. It was an interesting place to do.
It was an interesting place. Very productive for fossils, but now it's covered up.
Do you know what the price of the museum is? Is there a discount for students if they're not at UW?
There is, I actually don't know.
Okay, last I checked, I think it was $22, but it's free, I think, right? When it opens again, free every first Thursday of the month? Every
first Thursday, it's free. It's very, very crowded, as you can imagine, but we're a pretty big building, so we can take that. It is, all the information is on the website, and I'm sorry, I don't know.
Well, can you speak a little bit, we had questions about finding fossils. So what the process of finding fossils is, and how you get them on display. You know, your specialty is invertebrates, so why don't you talk a little bit, how do you know where to look for a fossil?
That's always a great question. So essentially what you're doing is deciding what you want to find. So you have to start with the idea of what you're planning to find. I'm looking for clams and snails of this age, or I'm going to look for dinosaurs of this age. And then you start looking in the literature and you start looking at geological maps. Geological maps are essential. So you can look at the map and say, I can see around southern Washington, there are marine rocks 50, 40 million years old in these places. And then you just go look. You just walk, literally walk around. Now, in Washington, it's a problem because there's trees everywhere in Western Washington. So you have to walk along the rivers or walk along the roads. Eastern Washington, it's easier, but there you have to be really careful you're not trespassing on other people's property. If you're going to look for dinosaurs, again, you have to get a geological map and say, right, what I want is a T-Rex. If I want a T-Rex, I want rocks that are late Cretaceous in age. And so you get a map of Montana and look for the mapped rocks that are late Cretaceous in age. And then you try to figure out what land you're on, how you get permission from the federal government, state government, private, and then you literally walk around. You just walk and look and walk and look until you see something. It's a very time-consuming process. You're better off if somebody's been there before you and will tell you, like the Tukwila site. But sometimes that's not going to happen. You just have to walk. I mean, it's nice. You're out there in the wilderness. You're just walking. It's really nice.
I actually went out with a field crew for the Burke. They run a field class and a class for teachers, the folks who work in Montana. And I was there for almost 2 weeks. You do a lot of walking, you get sore feet, it's hot, it's dry, it's some of the most miserable conditions because there's no shade. And they've been doing this for decades, and it wasn't until, was it 2014 they found, when did they find the T-Rex, Liz?
Yeah.
It was about that long ago.
2015, I think, was the first time they found it. But you can do it either way. So when I was a grad student, I went to that same site, because it had started about then, and did the same thing and decided I didn't want to do that. And then started to work in Washington, and then you walk the beaches in the pouring rain. It's gray, the sea is gray, the rocks are gray, the clouds are gray, and you think, I really should be in Montana looking for dinosaurs. So whatever you do, fieldwork can be difficult.
The collections manager, her name's Pat Horoyd, one of the mammal collection managers for fossils at Berkeley, has been going out into the West for decades. And her secret finally got out because everybody would leave from camp, and these are 14-hour days because you're only out there for a short amount of time. You only have so much money to be out there, and you have to find as much as you can, collect as much as you can. We had one question about how do you get the animals or the fossils out of the rocks, and I'll say with invertebrates, it's nice because you can often hit the rock with a hammer a couple of times and out pops the clam, or maybe a little bit more than that, but you usually don't spend more than a few hours maximum. T-Rex, it took several years of carefully chipping the rock around the T-Rex skull, bringing it back to the museum and chipping it away very, very slowly. I'll show you some pictures of that.
Yeah.
But I was gonna say, it turns out Pat's secret is she goes out in the morning with everybody and then takes a nap, finds what shade she can, takes a nap for a couple hours when it gets really hot. So 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock. And then she gets up again and does the field work and is the most energetic person there.
I don't know where she can find a place to take a nap there.
Apparently she has herself.
That's very smart. That's very smart.
Let's see, we have a few more questions. We'll try to get to as many as possible. This one was asking, do you still have the same passion for collecting fossils as you did when you first became a paleontologist?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I think it's more passionate now because I don't have to produce. You know, when you're a scientist and you're a research scientist, you have to publish papers all the time. And so there's an enormous amount of pressure on you to do the right thing. Now that I'm retired, I can do what I want to do. And it's really fun. I love to look for fossils. I love to be out there. There's always 10,000 questions to answer. You can do a research project, you come up to the end, but at the end, when you think you've answered your question, there's 10 other questions, and you want fossils to do that. So yes, indeed, indeed.
I think this sort of ties into the next question, which is in the movies, the idea of finding treasure and fossils has been played out numerous times. However, this has always made me wonder, how real is this scenario? And sort of a tie-in is it possible for me to find any type of fossils in my own backyard?
It depends on where you live. If you live in Montana, South Dakota, Wyoming, you're going to find fossils in your backyard. If you live in Western Washington, nah. You know, there are, so around Bellevue area, Factoria area, there are definitely fossils in your backyard, Tukwila, but mostly there aren't any. There aren't any. We live in a difficult kind of place, unfortunately. So it does depend. And one of the things about Washington is we have all these amazing volcanoes. We've had volcanoes for 40 million years. It covers up a lot of our space. So we don't actually have a lot of rocks, sedimentary rocks, that produce fossils. So it's always a battle. I am currently working with the Washington State mapping geologists and trying to help them get ages on rocks. And we go out and they go out and we look for fossils and we don't find fossils. They should be in those rocks, but we don't find the fossils. So it's a constant battle. It's a challenge. It's a fun challenge. You always say, if they say, do you want to go to the field? Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, it just did something weird with the arrows there. But I'll add that, you know, it depends too on your definition of treasure and your definition of fossil. We do have coal seams that run through the Bellevue area and down in Black Diamond. That's technically a fossil, but not really something most people would display. And treasure to a paleontologist might mean something different than it would in a Hollywood movie, because you find, you know, even if it's not the shark tooth, you find a beautiful shell that's, you know, preserved. For me, a treasure is if it's preserved with the original shell material so that I can analyze the chemistry. And there's just something magical about popping open a rock or carefully uncovering a rock, whichever way you're doing it, and knowing you're seeing something that no human on Earth has ever seen before.
Right.
Because it's been buried for 10 million years. Here's one is, you've addressed it a little bit, but it says, my question is, how do paleontologists and archaeologists identify and classify the fossils that they find as to the geological period? So I think, how do you know what age something is?
That's a very good question because it's actually very hard to answer. We get the ages because of about 150 years of geologists trying to work this out. We rely on the fact that organisms evolve, and once an organism has become extinct, we don't see that organism again. So if we put together sequences of rocks that you can see, you can stand and see one layer of rock is on top of the other, and you look at the fossils within those rocks, you can see where organisms appear and then go extinct, and then new organisms appear and then go extinct. And so we can say which ones are older than the ones above and which ones are younger than the ones. And that's how we started 150 years ago. That's how geologists started. We still do that to a degree, but now we have 150 years of collections and people who have put this together in other parts of the world, and we compare our collections to those. The thing that I mentioned, those microfossils, they're the most helpful because you can get a lot of microfossils in a very small area, and you can compare them to other microfossils around the world. In the last about, I don't know, Kathryn, maybe 50 years, I would say, we have radiometric dating. And I don't know if you've talked about radiometric dating in your class yet, but there are ways of getting numerical ages on some rocks. And those we use to tie together some things. So we have, as I said, I've been working with the geologists in Olympia, and we have been getting really nice numerical ages based on uranium lead dating. But unfortunately, where we have nice dates, we don't have any fossils. So we're really kind of stuck. But we know that layer of rock, so the layer of rock that I got fossils from in the Cowlitz River, we now have dates from that layer away from where the rocks are. So I can give those fossils an actual date. I'm not sure that really answered the question, but that's how we do it.
Well, you remind me of one thing in that, we talk about the exciting finds, but there are some field seasons where you go out, you're sure you have the right rocks, the right environment, and you just don't find diddly squat. Right. And there are lots of days in the field where everybody goes out and looks the hardest that you can, and you don't find anything. And there seems to be some Murphy law to me that if you do find something, it's like on the last day you were out there, or the last 5 minutes. This happened to me at the field school I was talking about. I was helping people find fossils. I looked around, I looked down. I realized I had a part of a thigh bone and a rib and a vertebra of something that was a small dinosaur. And then we had a student get sick and we had to go. But 5 minutes, I literally had 5 minutes to mark the area, hoping that somebody would find it next time. I should also say it was an area where they have a lot of broken dinosaur bones that they call explodosauruses, just because they're so common. So it probably wasn't anything unique, but it was a dinosaur and I had to leave it.
How frustrating is that? How frustrating is that? But it's true. There are many, many days where you just don't find anything. And it gets you down. It does get you down.
Well, but here's one that says, what's the most interesting fossil you have ever found or have ever seen in a museum?
Most interesting fossil I've ever found. I don't think I could answer that question. Actually, it was interesting at the time I found bunches of clams and snails up on the Olympic Peninsula, on the coastal side of the Olympic Peninsula, and they were very different from anything I'd ever seen. And we have lots of fossils in the Burke Museum, and I brought them back and I could see where these had been found elsewhere. And we later discovered this was an area where methane gases had been seeping out of the ground when these organisms were alive. So 30 million years ago, methane gas was seeping out under the sea and the organisms were living there. We now know so much more about it because they were living in areas where there was almost no oxygen at all. And that's where we find fossil bone. So to find fossil bone and these very weird clams, led us to understand that there's this whole environment there that we didn't even know existed. So that was exciting. That was exciting. But I haven't done anything in vertebrate paleontology since I was a grad student. I did go out to Nevada once and collect fossil fishes. They were 400 million year old fossil fishes. So that was pretty exciting. That was pretty exciting.
Now, let's see, just a couple more questions. It says, since you work in a museum, have you touched all the fossils there?
That's great. No, because as I said, we have about 4.5 million fossils. And you saw from the pictures in the drawers that some of them are really tiny and some of them are little bits and pieces. No, I haven't. I just had now it's a 5-year grant to work on one section of the marine invertebrates. So it is from 60 million years to younger. And I have touched each of those fossils. That's probably about 90,000, I would say. And over the last 5 years, I think I've touched all those fossils. The rest, I've touched some of them, I haven't touched others. Many of them I don't think have been touched for probably 40 years, maybe more. But they're there, you can touch, you can come if you're interested. I mean, if any of you are interested, just contact me when we're all back at work, and I would be so happy to take you behind the scenes and show you, any of you, show you what we've got. It would be really fun.
The fun thing about going behind the scenes for anybody is nobody can touch all of the fossils just because there's so many of them. But the ones on the oversized rack, I have to say, even though it's been a couple days since I've seen the first one, you know, the mammoth bones, I just see, and there's a few big dinosaur bones, and it's just hard not to pet them as you go by, even if you're walking through, just because it's just so amazing to do that.
It is pretty amazing.
Just a couple more questions for you, Liz, and then I know you have to go. And we had a bunch of questions that were asking people on the theme of sort of, what do you have to do to maintain fossils that are on display for the public? Is there anything special that you have to do for the real bones that are out there?
No, because when we mount the real bones, they've already been coated with a preservative. There are different types of preservatives, and that's what a preparator does. And so they're already coated. We don't have to do anything. The only thing we have to do is periodically do a visual inspection to see that nothing's breaking, nothing's cracking. Particularly with exhibits where the fossil is elevated a bit, gravity can push some of it down. So we do have to look out for that. That's the only thing. Occasionally somebody will come and dust, but really we haven't dusted in the new museum at all. I mean, you do that once every 2 or 3 years, but we don't mind dust on fossils. Otherwise, no, it's looking for breakage. That's the big thing. And
do I remember right that you actually have quite fierce air filters in the museum?
Very.
Especially in the collection rooms.
Yes, very, very strong air filters throughout the museum. And compared with the old building, it's absolutely amazing. We stay at the same temperature all the time. It's just phenomenal.
Does it ever get cold?
It's not so cold anymore. They made it warmer. They made it warmer.
The nice thing about fossils, from my point of view, I've worked both with modern animals and with fossil animals. One, fossils don't smell. If you're working with modern bones, there's definitely an odor, even if they've been cleaned. And a lot of modern bones, I think again, the museum at Berkeley, University, California, Berkeley, they're kept at 62 degrees in a special room. So if you're working with them, it's just cold and you have to have your hands free, and it's chilling.
I know, and you have to wear a hat and gloves and things. It's 80 degrees outside and you're freezing.
Right.
You know, fossils aren't like that. We mostly don't care what temperature it is. It's a rock. By now it's a rock, so it's okay.
I'm just double checking the questions that were submitted beforehand. If anybody's here and I had missed one of your questions, please go ahead and put that in. I've been trying to answer some things in the chat as folks have added those in, and I'm just double checking those. We did have one question about whether we know the sex of the T-Rex skull. I will say a little bit more about the T-Rex skull after we let Liz go, but am I correct, Liz? That's the most complete T-Rex skull that's ever been discovered?
It is the most complete and the least distorted T-Rex skull has ever been discovered. Yes, that's absolutely true.
Yeah,
so
a lot of them.
It's spectacular. The only thing, and on display is the original bone, which we very rarely do with something that heavy. And you'll see from the armature how much we had to construct to hold it. I think a couple of the bones in the very beginning of the nose and maybe one other bone had to be replaced with plastic because it had been squashed too much, but that's the only one.
A lot of times
we have quite a lot of the postcranial that they're currently working on, and you will show the students how they work on that.
I will. I know that were excited because they had the arm bone, the humerus of the T-Rex.
And we have part of the pelvis, some rib bones, and I think part of a leg bone.
And is there any still in the ground, or have they?
Yes, there is. Yes, there is.
So they're more to discover.
Unfortunately, they had to cancel this year's season.
Oh.
So, but it's in the ground. It's there. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, it's been there 66 million.
It's been there for 65 million years. It's okay.
Cool. Well, I did want to point out some things in the exhibit. Do you want to stick around, Liz, or did you have to go?
No, I don't have to go. I can stick around.
Okay. If you would go ahead and stop share, I will pull up the PowerPoint on my screen. And that'll take just a minute here. It'll take another minute because I had the questions up. I'm gonna have to share and then stop share and then come back. So what I want to do is come back and say just a few things about the animals on the exhibit in terms of how they relate to the things that we've been talking about. And one of the things I want to remind you of is I talked about how the first dinosaurs were small bipedal carnivores. Small is kind of hard to picture when you don't have a skeleton. These are not, as I remember, these are not dinosaurs in the beginning. They are archosaurs, however. So they are the creatures which are going to evolve into dinosaurs. And that's one of the amazing things about some of the skeletons that you have on exhibit. I love this little guy right here. Do you know what's next to it, Liz?
No, that's the one from Zambia.
Okay. That's
so it's another archosaur.
Okay. So we got two of these early reptilian things.
Right. They're so close to dinosaurs, though. I would say they're at the point where dinosaurs went off on one side and the rest of archosaurs went off on the other side.
You know, things that are going to become crocodiles and so on.
Yeah.
One of the really exciting things in the study of dinosaurs is that we're starting to fill in the gaps in this area. That for a while you had sort of the end of the Permian and then there's this big blank spot, and then dinosaurs appear, first good skeletons like Eoraptor 230 million years ago. And we know that there's evolution going on, but we didn't have the skeletons. I was at the Geological Society of America meeting just a couple of years ago where people were presenting all sorts of new animals filling in this gap. In the background, you see Stegosaurus and Allosaurus, and I want to zoom in on those two so that if we move into the Jurassic, you see in the early Jurassic, the first herbivorous dinosaurs. They're going to evolve into things like Stegosaurus. One thing I like about these two skeletons, you had mounts of them for a long time, and these are the mounts from the old museum. They give you a sense of scale. And one thing that people, I think, often don't appreciate till you see them side by side is there are probably the two of the best known carnivores are carnivorous dinosaurs, Tyrannosaurus rex and Allosaurus. The skull of T-Rex is further in the background, and yet look at how much bigger it is than the Allosaurus skull. Allosaurus is about 8 to 9 meters long. So we're talking about 30 feet or so. T-Rex, you see at the same scale here, you know, we can say he's about 40 feet long. It doesn't sound that much bigger, but because of the way things scale up, he's huge. He's actually, what, 2 or 3 times as massive. Despite that fact, however, his hands are tiny. We talked about that last week. I'm waiting till you guys at the Burke actually have an arm for the T-Rex because their arms are about the same size as ours.
Right, so in the old museum we had the arm on display, but we haven't put it out yet because we're waiting for the other arm.
You think it's there in the ground and they'll get it?
I think it's there in the ground.
Oh, that would be so awesome.
Well,
and this is a story. Yeah, this is a story that's going to unfold, you know, for the museum.
I think so. I think so.
At least another 5 years, maybe over the next decade, we'll be uncovering more and more of this skeleton. They will be uncovering more and more of this skeleton. Stegosaurus is one of the animals we'll talk about next week. You have just the beginnings of an introduction to the armored dinosaurs this week. And one thing that's interesting about this group is the Stegosaurus are relatively common in the Jurassic. And then they take a nosedive in the Cretaceous. Their cousins, the ankylosaurs, armored tank sort of turtles of the dinosaur world, take over in the Cretaceous. And it's probably a competitive replacement, meaning the armored dinosaurs, among the armored dinosaurs, the ankylosaurs seem to have been better at not being eaten. Liz teaches dinosaurs, or taught, you retired.
I don't do it anymore, no.
Yeah, so you're welcome to jump in at any time. That's a summary of a lot. Here's a close-up of those two animals. Look at a couple things here. The teeth of the Allosaurus, right at the edge of the jaw. We talked about how the skulls of the Saurischian dinosaurs, like the Allosaurus, differ from the Ornithischians. The teeth for Stegosaurus, they're in there, but they're a little bit more hidden. They're a little bit farther in the mouth. We come to T-Rex. I want to just point out a few things that people have recognized recently. One of them is, you look at the jaw, notice there's a bunch of little, they look almost like pimples that have been popped, little holes. There's some up along here too. A lot of those holes are actually for nerves that run through the face. And there was a study published in the last couple of years. It was very interesting. You know, how sensitive was the face of T-Rex? So turns out probably they did have a lot of nerves coming in. Notice also the teeth of this animal. I've talked about this, how they're constantly replaced. And you see in this close-up, we've got a bunch of teeth that are smaller. Those are teeth that are coming in. Notice the gaps, teeth where they have been replacing or are in the process of replacing. And I can't tell, it looks like there might even be a broken tooth in the back.
Yeah, I think there is.
Yeah, sometimes that happens during life, sometimes that was after death. One thing I love about the mount for the skull is you can look up the throat. You heard Dr. Holtz from his talk for the Burke Museum discuss the fact that T-Rex had a solid bone in its mouth. All of this brown area is bone. The black is the metal that they had to go in to support it. And this is quite a collaboration between the metal workers, the exhibit specialists, and the paleontologists to make sure this bone was there for people to see, but safely supported. And that's the solid palate that protected the soft tissue and the rest of the head if he's, you know, holding struggling prey. This is going back in time before the T-Rex skull had actually been pulled out of the rock completely. They notice have white around the edge. So when you find something, usually you find just a little bit sticking out of the ground. You dig around the area very carefully where you think the skull is. You take the whole rock. Often these things weigh a couple of tons. So it takes some heavy equipment, at least some heavy lifting, to get them onto a truck that then brings it to Seattle. And this is a cradle that actually spins around so that they can rotate it as they go. And this is a now retired collection manager called Bruce Crowley. Notice his dinosaur shirt. He was sort of infamous for all of his, famous, I should say, not infamous, for all
Famous,
of
yeah.
handmade shirts that he made with wonderful fabrics. And the help he has along the way. And notice they're just scraping centimeter by centimeter, millimeter by millimeter, scraping the rock very carefully off because they don't want to get any of the bone. Over time, they uncovered it more. You see the lower jaw is here. This is the head. His nose is right here. So often the bones get tumbled around after death. And you don't know how much is there until you get it all cleaned up. And here it's sort of at the end, at least of cleaning off the skull.
So this was the man, Mike Hunt, who actually made this cradle and made everything to support the fossil while we were doing it. We hired him. He's a T-Rex specialist. He's a T-Rex preparator specialist. Can you imagine that in your life? That must be an exciting life. And so he came out from Washington, D.C. To work on this T-Rex. Very clever man, very clever man.
That's awesome. I should also say this is the Tufts Love T-Rex. If you find a fossil, you get to usually decide what individual name the specimen gets. And in this case, it was named after the folks who found it.
Yes. So these two gentlemen are actually physicians, medical physicians with the University of Washington, and they have spent many, many summers, parts of their vacation summer, wandering around Montana doing just what we asked in the very beginning, looking for fossils. And they walk in those areas where we have permits to collect fossils and just keep walking. They kept saying they'd found a T-Rex. They never did. I mean, they're there about 10 days, I would say, each time. And this time they did. They found that fossil. They looked at it and said it was too big to be anything else. It was only a very small part of the skull sticking out. And they went back to Greg Wilson, who runs the camp, and said, we've found a T-Rex. And Greg said, yes, yes, of course you have, fine, totally. And they said for 3 days, they kept going to him and saying, you've got to come and see, you've got to come and see. But he didn't believe it. Finally, he went out and he said, oh, that's a T-Rex. They said, yes, we've been telling you. So those are the people who found it and actually put money into helping collect it.
Oh, that's awesome. So we heard Liz talk about the ammonites. I just want to point out we have a reconstruction of an ammonite. They were squid-like creatures with these beautiful coiling or straight or twisted, in some cases, shells. Here's a wonderful one I love. It almost looks like a giant snail, except it's not. They have amazing chambers. When school reopens, we have some of these that you can get a close-up look in our own collections on display. The last dinosaur I want to talk about is this Triceratops skull. I believe this is a composite animal, Liz?
This is a composite, and this is actually a 3D printing. This was the only specimen we did a 3D printing of. And it was done, the students actually did the scanning of various things, and then it was given to some company who did the 3D printing. I believe 5 or 6 different individuals.
Lots of different parts. They didn't have a complete skull, but if you have, pieces that fit together from different animals, you can get pretty close. And one of the great things about this exhibit is as you're walking through the museum, you can kind of walk around the corner. You see it staring straight at you. Look at how narrow that skull is. Look at how narrow that face is. That's often something that isn't necessarily prominent when you just see it from the side. And what I want to do is come and look at the side and look at a close-up of the frill. So all of these grooves, most of those are not cracks. It looks to me like there's a few cracks here, but the branching grooves are actually grooves for blood vessels. One of the interesting things about these frills is that they seem to have been highly vascularized. So there was a lot of blood flow, and we'll talk about what people think that might have meant for the purpose of these frills. If you turn around, rotate 180 degrees, if you're standing by the Triceratops, you'll see something about like this. So we've now jumped to the most modern vertebrates in the museum. The Ice Age animals are typically only 20,000, 120,000 years old. But this is one thing that we do have in Washington State. Washington State does have mammoths. The tusk you saw earlier from Liz was found at a construction site in Seattle. Every now and then somebody finds a tusk on a beach. I don't know if we have any saber-toothed cats, but we definitely
have one tooth. One tooth from Yakima County.
One, there you go. So we know they were here. If you have the tooth, you know they were here, but the carnivores.
They were here. One was here anyway.
Right. The carnivores are always going to be, in most cases, more rare because typically they need to eat the herbivores, so they have to be less rare than their prey. For mammalian ecosystems over in Africa, it's typically a ratio about 10 to 1 for warm-blooded carnivores, 10 times as many herbivores as there are carnivores. If you're a cold-blooded crocodile, you don't need to eat as often. So there's a slightly different ratio for cold-blooded animals. The ground sloth, these were amazing animals, herbivores about the size of bears. And today, their closest living relatives are the sloths that live in Central America, live in the trees. Notice right here we have a bison. This is a relative of the modern bison, the modern buffalo as they're sometimes called, that we have on the Great Plains. But back in the Ice Age, the animals were much, much bigger. Bison antiquus is what they're sometimes called. And, you know, I think this, personally, the saber-toothed cat's about to get smushed by the elephant. Elephant relative, sorry, he's a mammoth.
He's a mammoth, yes.
But I want to take a close-up look of him jumping. It's a beautiful pose. They probably would not have lasted all that long if they attack a mammoth leg, but these teeth are an amazing feature of these saber-toothed cats. This is Smilodon. Liz, do you know Smilodon?
Smilodon from California.
Yeah. So the La Brea tar pits that I talked about as my favorite museum when I was growing up have a lot of these Smilodons. I think it's a great name, Smilodon fatalis, the fatal smile. But look at these teeth. You not only have the canines that are these long, about the size of bananas, so long they stick out below the lower jaw. We have molars, specialized for slicing, and their incisors are specializing for slicing as well. So unlike the dinosaur that had teeth more or less all the same shape, these mammals have a big variety. We heard Liz talk about the whales, so I'm going to move on past those, except I want to point out we've got lots of invertebrates found in Washington State that are surrounding the whale. We have to give the invertebrates their due.
Thank you.
This is actually a picture from Governor Inslee's visit. So he's musing, looks like he's paying attention at least, to the wall. And as Liz says, this white line is reconstructions of climate through time. So when we start at the end of the time of the dinosaurs, the first fossil here is about 10 million years past what the dinosaurs have. It's still very warm. The Mesozoic was a time that was always warmer than today, but for the past 50 million years, it's been cooling. There's been some downs and ups, but in general, it's been cooling. There are lots of different ways we get that line for climate, but one is by looking at all of these leaf fossils. So I did want to zoom in. The top of this, 50 million years ago, 55 million years ago, these giant palm trees, or rather giant palm leaves, they're about 5 feet across, tells us it has to have been warmer because palm trees can't survive in climates where you have a hard frost. You come over time and the fossil leaves change. They become smaller. They become a lot closer to what we see today. There was a question in the chat about where you could find fossils in Washington State, if you could find fossils anywhere. And I want to point out, notice there's a sign here that says Republic Flora. One of the best localities for fossils, leaves in the world is in Eastern Washington at the town of Republic. You heard Kirk Johnson talk about this in the first video. He talked about going to Republic since paleobotany was his specialty. These are the types of fossils he was finding there, just beautifully preserved leaves. Some places around that area, Eastern Washington, Idaho, you even get color preserved when you crack open the leaves. If you look closely, they still look pretty brown, but if you look closely, there's a little bit of yellow or red. It oxidizes very quickly once it hits the atmosphere, but they're amazing preservation. So we go around the corner. Here is the line coming down. Fossil wood. Those volcanoes cover a lot of fossil sites, but they also cover a lot of trees. So we do have some very nice fossilized forests in Eastern Washington. And I wasn't quite sure about this animal.
It's a horse. Actually, that's the horse.
No, that's a horse. Okay.
That's Mesohippus that was in the prep room in the old lab. Yeah.
Okay. This is why we need you, because I don't have all the fossils memorized.
Yeah, I'll have to go. I'll have to go at 2:20. Yep.
Well, I think we're just about done.
Oh, look at that.
I just wanted
That's
to finish
gorgeous.
with a close-up of, because this is my specialty when I was doing my graduate research, looking at the teeth of, here we have that mastodon at the door. He has pointy teeth because he was eating leaves from trees. And here is actually a couple of Bruce and another, I'm not sure who this is, a couple of curators picking up a mammoth skull that somebody had found several years ago. And the teeth of the mammoth, you look at it, it's sort of like a big washboard because he's eating grass. Grass is a lot tougher than the leaves of trees. It wears your teeth down, so you need washboards to do it. And I was just going to end that if you go by and you look at people's offices, there are some amazing toys, Lego paleontologists, models, etc., as well as, the occasional model. Archaeopteryx. These days, most people reconstruct it with feathers. I gather you guys found this when you were moving.
Actually, we knew it was there.
Okay.
Ron and I knew it was there. Somebody in about, I can't remember, probably in the 70s had knitted that sweater.
Yeah, so it's.
But he'd been on display and now he's come back with his sweater on.
Right, all of the things that, it's a museum that were on display. If you take it off display, it's probably still around somewhere.
Yeah, it's probably still around somewhere. All right, thank you very much, everybody. It was fun.
Thank you. We'll say goodbye and thank you very much to Liz.